I never thought something so innocent could turn into a moment I'd never forget. It all started one weekend when I visited my best friend, Lila, at her family's house. We'd been close since high school, and her home always felt like a second home to me. Lila's parents were out of town, and she'd invited me over for a girls' weekend, movies, homemade food, and lots of catching up. But what happened that night had nothing to do with our usual laughter or sleepover fun. It was something completely unexpected, and it changed the way I saw her brother forever. Her brother, Ryan, had recently moved back in after graduating from college. I didn't know him that well, just the occasional polite conversations and a few awkward run-ins in the kitchen. He was the quiet type, tall with a calm presence that made him hard to read. But that night, everything felt different. Maybe it was the way he offered to cook dinner with us, or how his eyes lingered a little longer than before. I tried to brush it off, thinking I was overanalyzing. After all, he was my best friend's brother, and there were unspoken lines you just didn't cross. Later that evening, Lila suggested we try some DIY spa stuff, face masks, foot soaks, and light massages. It was something we'd done before during sleepovers. It was meant to be fun and relaxing. We set up in the living room, dimmed the lights, and played soft music. At one point, Lila got a call from her mom and stepped outside to talk. That's when Ryan walked in. I was lying on the mat, scrolling through my phone, when he casually said, "Want me to help with the massage? I've done a few for my college friends during finals week." His tone was calm, casual even, like he genuinely just wanted to help. I hesitated, not sure how to respond. But I didn't want to make it weird, so I agreed, thinking it would just be a quick shoulder rub until Lila returned. At first, it was exactly that, nothing unusual. But slowly, something shifted. His hands moved with a kind of familiarity that made my heart beat faster. He leaned in a little closer. I could feel his breath near my neck. I kept telling myself it was probably just in my head, that I was imagining things. But the tension in the air was hard to ignore. Then he said something I didn't expect. His voice was soft, almost whispering, and it completely caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say, and in that moment, I froze. Before I could react, Lila walked back into the room. What happened next? I never saw coming. And that's where everything started to unravel. What Ryan did after that night forced me to question everything, my friendship, my own boundaries, and what it really means to trust someone. This wasn't just a massage anymore. It was the beginning of a truth I wasn't ready to face. Lila walked in with a smile, completely unaware of the tension in the room. I quickly sat up and adjusted my shirt, pretending like nothing had happened. Ryan stood and casually stepped aside, as if he hadn't just whispered something that made my entire body tense up. My heart was still racing, but I forced a laugh when Lila asked if everything was okay. I nodded, too stunned to speak, unsure of what I was even feeling. The rest of the night felt different. Ryan stayed close, but quiet. He didn't say much, just gave me a look every now and then that made my thoughts spiral. I kept thinking, did I imagine it? Was it just me? But deep down, I knew something had shifted. There was a certain weight to that moment that I couldn't shake. It wasn't just a friendly gesture anymore. It felt intentional. It felt personal. As Lila and I settled into her room for the night, I tried to act normal. She was chatting away about a guy she liked from her college, completely unaware of the storm going on inside my mind. I wanted to tell her what happened. I wanted to ask if her brother had ever crossed any lines with other girls. But how could I? She was my best friend. And Ryan was her brother. What if I was wrong? The next morning, things got more confusing. Ryan was already in the kitchen, making coffee, like nothing had happened. He smiled at me, polite and warm, like he hadn't created this uncomfortable confusion just hours earlier. I found myself second-guessing everything again. Maybe he didn't mean anything by it. Maybe I overreacted. But then, Lila went upstairs to grab something, and once again, it was just the two of us. Ryan walked over to where I stood, leaned in a little too close, and softly said, "You seemed tense last night. I could help you relax again, if you want." His tone was calm, his words careful, but the message was clear. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. He knew exactly what he was doing. I froze. My throat felt dry. I looked at the stairs, hoping Lila would come down any second. I didn't respond. I just turned and walked toward the window, pretending to check the weather, trying to avoid his eyes. This was no longer a small awkward moment. It was turning into something I couldn't ignore. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop it, or who to even talk to. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it growing. That entire day, I couldn't stop thinking about what Ryan had said. His words kept echoing in my mind, and no matter how much I tried to brush them off, I knew this wasn't something I could ignore. But I also couldn't bring myself to tell Lila. We had been best friends for years. We'd been through everything together, school drama, family struggles, breakups. But this felt different. It wasn't just about someone making a move. It was about trust. And now I didn't know who I could trust anymore. Lila had always spoken highly of Ryan. She told me he was quiet but kind, helpful around the house, always protective of her. And I'd seen that side of him too, until now. That's what made this whole situation harder to process. He didn't act like someone who would cross boundaries. Yet here I was, stuck in a house with him, feeling like a line had already been crossed. Later that afternoon, Lila mentioned she needed to run to the store and asked if I wanted to come. I made up an excuse about needing to shower and relax, but the truth was I didn't want to leave her alone with him, not because I was worried about her, but because I didn't know how I'd react if he said something else to me. I needed space to think, to figure out what I was feeling. When they left, I sat in Lila's room, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept going in circles. Was I overreacting? Was I making something out of nothing? But deep inside, I knew what I felt wasn't confusion, it was discomfort. And there was a difference. That evening, a new layer to the situation started to unfold. While we were eating dinner, Ryan casually brought up a story from his college days, something about a friend who misread signals and ended up ruining a friendship. He looked straight at me while telling it. His tone was calm, almost like he was warning me or testing how I'd react. My hands froze around the fork. Lila laughed, not catching the undertone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a story. It was a message. The air around us grew heavier, and I felt trapped in a strange game I didn't agree to play. But I also knew one thing for sure, this wasn't going to end quietly. The next 2 days were anything but normal. I stayed alert, cautious with every move I made. Ryan wasn't being obvious anymore, he'd gone back to his quiet, helpful self. To anyone else, he looked completely innocent. But I knew better now. His silence felt calculated, like he was waiting for something. The more I tried to act like things were fine, the more I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, and at any moment, one wrong step would make everything collapse. I kept noticing little things, how he would appear wherever I was in the house, even if I hadn't told anyone where I'd be. How he offered to help with small tasks, but always found a way to stand too close. Lila didn't notice any of it. She was just happy to have her brother and best friend under one roof, and I didn't want to ruin that for her. But inside, I was starting to feel cornered. One night, Lila had plans to meet an old friend for dinner and asked if I'd be okay staying back. I hesitated, but said yes. I didn't want to explain my uneasiness because I still wasn't sure how to say it without sounding like I was overthinking. I told myself I'd stay in her room with the door locked and wait it out. But I didn't expect what actually happened. It was around 8 p.m. I was in her room, headphones on, trying to distract myself with a show. Suddenly, I heard a soft knock on the door. I paused. Another knock, this time slower. My chest tightened. I knew who it was before I even asked. I stayed quiet, hoping he'd go away. But instead, he spoke, his voice low, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. I just want to talk. I think you misunderstood everything. My hands started shaking. There was no way I was opening that door. I stayed still, trying to control my breathing. Then the doorknob turned gently. It was locked, but the sound of it twisting made my stomach drop. He knocked again, a little harder this time. Can you just listen to me for a second? I stood frozen, my back pressed against the wall, praying Lila would come home soon. My mind was racing, heart pounding, as I realized this was no longer something I could ignore. Everything had led to this moment, and I had no idea how it was going to end. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there, heart pounding so loud it felt like Ryan could hear it through the door. After a moment, the knocking stopped. I waited, still frozen, listening for footsteps. Nothing. Just silence. Then a soft click, his door across the hall closing. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my whole body trembling. This wasn't confusion anymore. It was fear. And I hated that I felt this way in a house that had once felt like home. Minutes turned into an hour before Lila finally came back. She was glowing from her dinner, laughing about how her old friend hadn't changed a bit. I tried to match her energy, nodding, smiling, but my insides were in knots. I wanted to tell her so badly, but every time I thought about it, I pictured her face falling. I pictured her questioning my version of the story or worse, believing him. I kept quiet. The next morning, I decided I needed to leave. I made up an excuse about needing to help my mom with something back home. Lila looked disappointed but didn't press. Ryan wasn't around when I packed up my things, and I felt relieved. Until I reached into my bag to grab my phone and saw something tucked inside, something that wasn't mine. It was a note. Folded neatly. Just one sentence scribbled across the page: running doesn't make the tension disappear, it just delays it. My hands went cold. I looked around the room as if someone was watching me. That's when I realized, he must have slipped it in while I was asleep. He'd been in the room. The idea made me feel sick. I left the house with a smile, hugged Lila goodbye, and promised we'd meet soon. The moment I got into the car, I locked the doors and burst into tears. I hadn't told anyone, not even my own family. But now it wasn't just about discomfort or creepy behavior. This was calculated. It was real. I tried to put it behind me, but Ryan wasn't finished. Later that night, I got a message from an unknown number. Just a photo. It was of me, taken through a crack in the door while I was lying on Lila's bed, headphones on. No words, no explanation. Just the image. My entire body went numb. The conflict was no longer just emotional. It was becoming something darker. Something I never imagined I'd be caught in. My best friend's brother, someone I barely knew, had managed to twist a normal weekend into a nightmare. And now, he wasn't just crossing lines, he was watching me, studying me, waiting. I realized I couldn't run from it anymore. This wasn't over. In fact, it felt like it was only just beginning. I stared at the photo on my phone for what felt like forever. My hands were shaking, my thoughts racing, but one thing was clear: I couldn't stay silent anymore. The fear that had been building inside me turned into something else. Determination. I wasn't going to let Ryan control the narrative or make me feel powerless. I finally called Lila. My voice trembled as I spoke, but I told her everything about the massage, the whispered words, the knock on her door, and the photo that had just landed on my phone. There was a long silence on the other end. I braced myself for disbelief, or worse, anger. But instead, her voice came through, low and shaken. "You're not the first person to say something like this about him," she whispered. That sentence hit harder than anything else. She told me about a distant cousin who had once made a vague comment during a family reunion. And another friend who suddenly cut contact after staying over for a weekend. Lila had always brushed it off as awkwardness or overthinking. But now, hearing my story, she began to piece everything together. I think I've been protecting the wrong person, she said quietly. That night, we met in person. Lila sat across from me, pale, holding her phone. She had gone through her security camera app, and what she found sealed everything. There, in the footage from outside her room, was Ryan, standing in front of her door at 8:03 p.m. the night she was gone. Holding something. Waiting. Then, slipping into the room. Just like I'd feared. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just stood, grabbed her keys, and drove straight to her parents' house, where Ryan had gone that morning. The confrontation wasn't loud. Lila told him she'd seen the footage, knew about the message, and that it wasn't just me, there were others. Ryan didn't deny it. Instead, he said something that chilled her to the core: people always misunderstand intentions. I was just trying to connect. That night, Lila made a choice that showed me what true friendship looked like. She reported everything. To her family, to someone in authority, and to a counselor her family trusted. She made sure it wouldn't be buried again. I respected her more than ever. Days passed. I began to breathe easier. I started sleeping without checking over my shoulder. I thought it was all behind me, until I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just one line inside. I'm not done learning about you yet. My fingers went cold. Even when you think the truth is out and the danger is gone, some stories don't end where you expect. Some shadows linger. And sometimes, the ones who scare you the most, are still watching from a distance. I stared at that letter for a long time, the words burning into my mind. I'm not done learning about you yet. It was the kind of message that could easily send me back into panic, but this time, I didn't let it. Something had changed in me. I wasn't that scared, confused girl anymore. I had seen what silence could cost. I had seen what power a person could have when they think no one will ever speak up. And I had learned that staying quiet only gives that power more room to grow. I gave the letter to Lila. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. She simply nodded, took a picture of it, and added it to the file she'd been quietly building with a counselor and a legal advisor. Ryan had already left the city after their confrontation, and her parents, now fully aware of what had happened, were no longer protecting him either. They were cooperating. They had questions of their own. And while the road to accountability wasn't going to be quick or simple, at least it had finally started. The weeks that followed were a mix of healing and uncertainty. Lila and I grew even closer. Our friendship wasn't just built on old memories anymore, it had weathered something real. Something heavy. She apologized often, not because it was her fault, but because she hated that someone in her life had hurt someone she cared about. That mattered more than anything. As for me, I started therapy to talk through everything. The fear, the shame, the doubt. I also talked openly to a few close friends, something I never thought I'd be brave enough to do. And what surprised me the most was that many of them shared their own experiences, some different, some painfully similar. I realized how many people carry silent scars from people they trusted. Even though Ryan never contacted me again after that letter, I stayed cautious. I took steps to protect myself, changed my number, updated my privacy settings, even moved to a different apartment closer to family. But I never let fear run my life again. That was the biggest lesson in this whole true infidelity story. That the scariest moments don't define us, but how we respond to them does. Looking back, I wish I had spoken up sooner. I wish I had trusted my gut from the start. But sometimes we have to live through the confusion to find our voice. And now, if someone ever finds themselves in a similar situation, questioning boundaries, second-guessing someone's intentions, I hope they know they're not alone. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from a stranger. It comes from someone close. Someone you never imagined would cross the line. But healing is possible. Growth is possible. And even when it feels like your world has been turned upside down, you can still find your way back to peace. You can still find your way back to yourself. 25.